The invitation arrived like a smile with a blade hidden behind it. Rachel Hartley found the cream envelope waiting on the small brass table outside her apartment door just after 7 in the morning, placed neatly between a dry cleaning receipt and a folded utility notice, too expensive to belong to an ordinary Tuesday. Her name was written in black ink across the front, elegant and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that made even paper feel superior. For a moment, she simply stood there in the quiet hallway of her Manhattan building, listening to the elevator hum behind the walls and the soft rush of traffic 5 floors below. She already knew who had sent it before she opened it. Daniel Brooks had always believed presentation could soften cruelty. Inside was a wedding invitation printed on thick ivory card stock, heavy between her fingers, bordered with silver lettering and a faint scent of roses that seemed almost theatrical. Daniel Brooks and Vanessa Clark request the honor of your presence. Rachel read the line once, then again, not because it surprised her, but because the old version of herself would have needed a chair. The woman standing there now only noticed details. The date, the venue, the Ellery Grand Hotel, 31 floors above Midtown, with a ballroom famous for glass walls, white orchids, and men who mistook height for importance. Tucked beneath the invitation was a smaller card, handwritten by Daniel himself. Hope you can be happy for me. Rachel let out one slow breath. That sentence was not kindness. It was a stage direction. He did not want her happiness. He wanted her attendance. He wanted proof that the woman he had once dismissed as too quiet, too plain, too ordinary for his rising life would sit politely in a room full of witnesses while he displayed the woman he believed had replaced her. 3 years earlier, Daniel had ended their marriage in the kitchen of their old apartment, standing beside a marble island they bought after his first major funding round, wearing the gray watch Rachel had chosen for his launch dinner. He told her she no longer matched the image of where he was going. He said it calmly, almost gently, as if removing her from his future were an act of good taste. Rachel remembered the exact sound of the rain tapping against the windows that night. She remembered the magazine profile on the counter calling Daniel self-made. She remembered the strange silence inside her when she realized he truly believed it. Now, in her own apartment, with morning light falling across a narrow living room that belonged entirely to her, Rachel placed the invitation on the kitchen counter and looked at it as if it were evidence. She had a client call in 20 minutes, coffee cooling beside her laptop, and a life that no longer waited for Daniel to approve of it. Still, she knew she would go, not to bless him, not to suffer for him, not to sit in the ruins of what he had chosen to discard. She would go because Daniel had mistaken her silence for emptiness, and men like Daniel rarely understood the difference until silence walked into the room dressed in calm. By 6 that evening, Rachel stood before her mirror in a simple black dress that followed the line of her body without asking for attention. She fastened small pearl earrings, touched a light shade of lipstick to her mouth, and studied her reflection with no bitterness in her eyes. Outside, December had turned the city sharp and bright. She took a yellow cab through Midtown, watching holiday lights blur across the window while the driver muttered about traffic on Fifth Avenue. The Ellery Grand rose ahead in polished stone and glass, glowing against the winter dusk. Black cars waited at the curb. Guests stepped out in wool coats, satin heels, dark suits, and practiced laughter. Rachel entered through brass doors held open by men in navy uniforms, and the lobby smelled of lilies, perfume, and money arranged to look effortless. At the reception table, a young hostess checked her name, paused for half a second, then handed her a seating card without meeting her eyes for too long. Table 19, near the service doors. Of course. Rachel looked at the card, then toward the ballroom, where chandeliers burned like captured stars above rows of white flowers. Far across the room, beneath a floral arch, Daniel stood in a black tuxedo with a champagne glass in his hand, smiling as if the evening itself had been built to confirm his superiority. When he saw Rachel, his smile widened. Not warmly, triumphantly. He lifted his glass in a tiny toast from across the room, thanking her without words for arriving on time to witness his victory. Rachel did not look away. She walked to table 19, set down her clutch, and sat with her back straight while waiters moved behind her through the service doors. Around her, whispers softened and glances passed like folded notes. Daniel wanted her to feel placed, reduced, displayed at the edge of his celebration. Rachel rested her hands on the white tablecloth and felt only the cool weight of her own composure. Then the music changed. The ballroom doors opened. Every conversation fell quiet. Daniel turned toward the entrance, already glowing with pride, ready to present his perfect future to the room. Rachel turned with everyone else, expecting a stranger in white. The bride stepped into the light, and the first thing Rachel noticed was not her beauty. It was how carefully that beauty had been borrowed. The invitation arrived like a smile with a blade hidden behind it. Rachel Hartley found the cream envelope waiting on the small brass table outside her apartment door just after 7 in the morning, placed neatly between a dry cleaning receipt and a folded utility notice, too expensive to belong to an ordinary Tuesday. Her name was written in black ink across the front, elegant and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that made even paper feel superior. For a moment, she simply stood there in the quiet hallway of her Manhattan building, listening to the elevator hum behind the walls and the soft rush of traffic 5 floors below. She already knew who had sent it before she opened it. Daniel Brooks had always believed presentation could soften cruelty. Inside was a wedding invitation printed on thick ivory card stock, heavy between her fingers, bordered with silver lettering and a faint scent of roses that seemed almost theatrical. Daniel Brooks and Vanessa Clark request the honor of your presence. Rachel read the line once, then again, not because it surprised her, but because the old version of herself would have needed a chair. The woman standing there now only noticed details. The date, the venue, the Ellery Grand Hotel, 31 floors above Midtown, with a ballroom famous for glass walls, white orchids, and men who mistook height for importance. Tucked beneath the invitation was a smaller card, handwritten by Daniel himself. Hope you can be happy for me. Rachel let out one slow breath. That sentence was not kindness. It was a stage direction. He did not want her happiness. He wanted her attendance. He wanted proof that the woman he had once dismissed as too quiet, too plain, too ordinary for his rising life would sit politely in a room full of witnesses while he displayed the woman he believed had replaced her. 3 years earlier, Daniel had ended their marriage in the kitchen of their old apartment, standing beside a marble island they bought after his first major funding round, wearing the gray watch Rachel had chosen for his launch dinner. He told her she no longer matched the image of where he was going. He said it calmly, almost gently, as if removing her from his future were an act of good taste. Rachel remembered the exact sound of the rain tapping against the windows that night. She remembered the magazine profile on the counter calling Daniel self-made. She remembered the strange silence inside her when she realized he truly believed it. Now, in her own apartment, with morning light falling across a narrow living room that belonged entirely to her, Rachel placed the invitation on the kitchen counter and looked at it as if it were evidence. She had a client call in 20 minutes, coffee cooling beside her laptop, and a life that no longer waited for Daniel to approve of it. Still, she knew she would go, not to bless him, not to suffer for him, not to sit in the ruins of what he had chosen to discard. She would go because Daniel had mistaken her silence for emptiness, and men like Daniel rarely understood the difference until silence walked into the room dressed in calm. By 6 that evening, Rachel stood before her mirror in a simple black dress that followed the line of her body without asking for attention. She fastened small pearl earrings, touched a light shade of lipstick to her mouth, and studied her reflection with no bitterness in her eyes. Outside, December had turned the city sharp and bright. She took a yellow cab through Midtown, watching holiday lights blur across the window while the driver muttered about traffic on Fifth Avenue. The Ellery Grand rose ahead in polished stone and glass, glowing against the winter dusk. Black cars waited at the curb. Guests stepped out in wool coats, satin heels, dark suits, and practiced laughter. Rachel entered through brass doors held open by men in navy uniforms, and the lobby smelled of lilies, perfume, and money arranged to look effortless. At the reception table, a young hostess checked her name, paused for half a second, then handed her a seating card without meeting her eyes for too long. Table 19, near the service doors. Of course. Rachel looked at the card, then toward the ballroom, where chandeliers burned like captured stars above rows of white flowers. Far across the room, beneath a floral arch, Daniel stood in a black tuxedo with a champagne glass in his hand, smiling as if the evening itself had been built to confirm his superiority. When he saw Rachel, His smile widened. Not warmly, triumphantly. He lifted his glass in a tiny toast from across the room, thanking her without words for arriving on time to witness his victory. Rachel did not look away. She walked to table 19, set down her clutch, and sat with her back straight while waiters moved behind her through the service doors. Around her, whispers softened and glances passed like folded notes. Daniel wanted her to feel placed, reduced, displayed at the edge of his celebration. Rachel rested her hands on the white tablecloth and felt only the cool weight of her own composure. Then the music changed. The ballroom doors opened. Every conversation fell quiet. Daniel turned toward the entrance, already glowing with pride, ready to present his perfect future to the room. Rachel turned with everyone else, expecting a stranger in white. The bride stepped into the light, and the first thing Rachel noticed was not her beauty. It was how carefully that beauty had been borrowed. The laugh came from Rachel before she could decide whether silence deserved one more second of mercy. It was not loud. It was not careless. It was a small, breathless sound, almost polite, but in the Ellery Grand Ballroom it moved through the ceremony like a pin dropping onto marble. The officiant paused mid-sentence. A woman near the front lowered her program. A guest at the bar turned with a champagne flute halfway to his mouth. Even the piano softened, as if the music itself understood that something had slipped out of place. Rachel remained seated near the service doors, her black dress still, her face calm, one hand resting beside the folded seating card that had been chosen to diminish her. Across the aisle, Vanessa Clark stood beneath the white floral arch with Daniel's hand wrapped around hers. Her smile remained visible, but the rhythm behind it had changed. The bride's fingers tightened around the bouquet until the calla lilies leaned inward. Her eyes flicked once to Rachel's clutch, once to the table, once to Rachel's face. It was quick. Too quick for most people. Not quick enough for Rachel. Daniel noticed the room before he noticed the reason. That had always been his way. He did not feel embarrassment first. He felt the audience. His shoulders stiffened beneath the black tuxedo, and he turned from the altar with a smoothness meant to appear gracious. The smile stayed on his face, but Rachel saw the old impatience beneath it, the private irritation he used to carry into elevators after public events when someone else had received more attention than he thought appropriate. He stepped down from the floral platform and walked toward table 19 while the guests pretended not to watch. Rachel did not rise. She only lifted her eyes as he stopped beside her table, close enough for her to smell cedar cologne and expensive champagne. "Rachel," he said softly, the microphone no longer near his mouth. "Is there something you find amusing?" His tone was wrapped in velvet, but the blade was exactly where she remembered it. Years ago, that tone would have made her apologize just to smooth the room for him. She would have smiled too quickly, lowered her eyes, taken responsibility for a discomfort he had created. Tonight, she let the silence answer first. Then she looked past his shoulder, directly at Vanessa, who stood frozen beneath the chandeliers with a face arranged into bridal sweetness and eyes that had become watchful. "I apologize," Rachel said, her voice gentle enough that the nearest tables leaned in to hear it. "It is just strange how expensive a borrowed life can look under good lighting." The words did not strike the room loudly. They settled into it. Daniel's smile thinned. A man at the next table shifted in his chair. Someone gave a nervous little cough and pretended to study the flowers. Daniel glanced back at Vanessa, then at Rachel again, annoyed because he did not understand the sentence but understood that it had taken something from him. "This is my wedding," he said under his breath. "Not one of your reputation games." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "Then you should return to your bride." His jaw tightened. "You were invited because I thought you had finally learned how to be gracious." For a second, Rachel saw the kitchen again, the marble island, the rain, the magazine calling him self-made while her words sat inside his success without her name. She saw the old version of herself carefully swallowing every insult because love had trained her to value peace more than truth. Then the memory passed. "No, Daniel," she said. "I was invited because you wanted me to feel replaced." A few guests looked away too quickly. Daniel felt their attention and hated that he could not control it. "Do not flatter yourself," he said, but the sentence lacked weight. Rachel's eyes stayed steady. "I stopped doing that when I stopped flattering you." The room seemed to hold its breath again. Daniel stared at her, as if she had spoken in a language he had paid someone else to learn for him. At the altar, Vanessa released a soft laugh. Too bright, too late. Daniel, she called, her voice sweet enough to mend the surface if no one looked too closely. Come back. They are waiting. He turned toward the guests with a polished chuckle, raising one hand in apology, trying to make the moment look charming instead of cracked. Old friends, he said lightly, though no one truly laughed. Rachel watched him return to Vanessa and take her hand again. The officiant cleared his throat and resumed speaking about devotion, partnership, and forever. The ballroom accepted the performance because expensive rooms are trained to protect beautiful lies until the bill arrives. Rachel sat quietly as the ceremony continued. Vanessa lowered her lashes beside Daniel, but not before looking at Rachel one more time. There was no softness in that glance now, only calculation. Rachel rested her fingertips on the edge of the program card and let the smallest trace of a smile disappear before anyone could name it. She would not rush. She would not shout. Daniel had built an entire evening to make her look small. All she had to do was wait until the room was ready to see who had really been standing in borrowed light. As the ceremony folded itself back into place, Rachel let the words drift past her without entering. The officiant spoke about devotion, partnership, and building a future together, and the room accepted each sentence as if beauty could make it true. Daniel stood beneath the floral arch holding Vanessa's hand, his profile turned slightly toward the guests, his expression arranged into the soft confidence of a man being watched. Rachel had seen that expression before. Years earlier, before the chandeliers, before the tuxedo, before his name appeared in business magazines. Daniel had practiced that face in the narrow bathroom mirror of their first apartment in Brooklyn, while Rachel sat on the edge of the bathtub with a pen in her hand, rewriting the speech he was too nervous to give. Their apartment had been small, barely 600 square feet, with one window that looked toward a brick wall and a radiator that knocked through winter nights like an impatient guest. Daniel had ambition then, bright and raw, but ambition did not know how to speak to investors, how to enter a room, how to make strangers believe the risk was worth taking. Rachel taught it. She trimmed his proposals until they sounded sharp. She changed his emails so confidence replaced desperation. She built contact lists, memorized names, researched donors, studied dress codes, and packed his briefcase with printed notes because he always forgot something when he was nervous. On the morning of his first major investor lunch, he stood in their bedroom with one cuff undone, asking if the blue tie made him look young. Rachel fixed the cuff, straightened the tie, and gave him the first line he should say when he entered the room. That night, he came home glowing because they had listened. He lifted her in the kitchen and told her he could not do any of it without her. She believed him because love is easiest to trust before success learns how to take credit. Over time, Daniel's gratitude became quieter, then private, then inconvenient. In public, he called Rachel supportive. In private, he called her brilliant when no one else could hear. She chose the photographs for his first website, edited his founder story, softened his apology after a failed product launch, and turned his blunt ideas into speeches that made older men nod over steak dinners in Midtown. She knew which board member hated being interrupted, which investor preferred handwritten notes, which restaurant had a private room quiet enough for difficult conversations. Daniel stood at the center of every room, but Rachel knew where the light had been placed. At first, she told herself it was enough to see him rise. Then the rise changed him. Their apartment became a loft with a doorman. His suits became custom. His voice deepened when he spoke on panels, as if authority had been tailored along with the jackets. He began saying phrases like executive image and public alignment, never remembering who had built the image he now protected. At dinners, he praised women who sparkled without effort, women who looked as if their lives had no grocery lists, no late-night edits, no quiet labor hidden behind a man's applause. Rachel heard the comparison before he ever said it. The sentence finally came on a rainy Thursday evening, after a profile called him self-made. The magazine lay open on the kitchen island, his photograph lit beautifully, his answers polished with lines Rachel had written years before. Daniel stood across from her in a charcoal suit, already dressed for a celebration he had not invited her to, and said she no longer matched the direction his life was taking. He said it gently, as if gentleness could make rejection refined. Rachel remembered the rain tapping against the glass, the dishwasher half open, the smell of coffee gone cold. She remembered not arguing because some part of her had already understood that Daniel did not want the truth. He wanted permission to outgrow the woman who had made growth possible. Now, in the Ellery Grand Ballroom, Rachel watched him promise forever to Vanessa, a woman wearing the shape of borrowed elegance beneath white flowers. The vows sounded tender from a distance. Up close, Rachel recognized the old pattern. Daniel still loved what reflected well on him. He still confused polish with worth. He still did not know the difference between a woman and the image she helped him maintain. Rachel lowered her eyes to the program card beside her plate and felt the past settle into place, not as pain, but as evidence. Once, she had built his name in silence. Tonight, silence would let him stand long enough for the room to see what he had built without her. After Daniel left, Rachel expected the silence to punish her. For the first few weeks, it followed her from room to room like cold weather, settling into the empty side of the closet, the second coffee mug she no longer used, the late evenings when no one asked her to review a speech 10 minutes before a car arrived downstairs. But silence did not stay cruel forever. Slowly, it became space. She moved into a smaller apartment on the west side of Manhattan with one bedroom, pale walls, and windows that caught the morning light between two buildings. There was no marble island, no framed magazine profile, no expensive watch left beside the sink as a reminder of a man who had mistaken himself for self-made. There was only Rachel, a desk near the window, and a calendar she filled with her own name at the center. She sold the last piece of jewelry Daniel had given her and used the money to rent a small office near Bryant Park. It was not impressive. The elevator shook between floors, the hallway smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee, and the window faced the brick side of another building. Rachel loved it anyway. Nothing in that office was designed to make Daniel look powerful. Every inch of it belonged to the woman he had underestimated. At first, her clients were small. A bakery owner trying to recover after a bad review, a nonprofit director who needed donor letters rewritten, a young founder whose pitch deck sounded confident but said nothing true. Rachel listened more than she spoke. She read every sentence, every photograph, every pause in a client's story. She had learned from Daniel that image could lift a person into rooms they had not earned, but she had also learned that false polish always left fingerprints. She became skilled at finding them. A phrase borrowed from someone else. A timeline softened to hide a failure. A founder story too clean to be lived in. Rachel did not shame people for wanting to be seen. She only refused to let them build trust on stolen ground. Her reputation grew quietly, then quickly. People who once knew her only as Daniel Brooks's former wife began sending messages with careful politeness, asking if she could review a launch, a speech, a crisis statement, an investor narrative. Rachel answered the ones she chose. That choice alone felt like wealth. Then came the meeting at Reed Capital. It took place on a gray afternoon in a private conference room overlooking Park Avenue, 42 floors above traffic. Nathaniel Reed sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, calm, silver at the temples, his hands folded near a closed leather folder. The company under review was a luxury wellness brand with warm slides, glowing testimonials, and a founder who spoke about authenticity with practiced ease. Everyone in the room seemed ready to approve the deal until Rachel turned to page 21 and circled a repeated phrase in blue ink. She found it again in a testimonial, again in a speech transcript, again in an archived website from a different company that had disappeared 2 years earlier. When Nathaniel asked what concerned her, Rachel did not raise her voice. She simply laid the pattern out piece by piece, copied language, shifted dates, borrowed client stories, a public image assembled from other people's work. The room changed as she spoke. Not loudly, quietly, the way expensive rooms change when certainty begins to lose value. After the meeting ended and the deal was paused for deeper review, Nathaniel walked with Rachel to the elevator. He did not flatter her. He did not call her impressive in the easy way men sometimes used when they wanted to sound generous. He looked at her with clear attention and said, "You see what others are paid not to notice." Rachel watched the elevator numbers descend. "I see what people hope no one will ask twice." Nathaniel gave a small nod. "Then ask twice for me." That was how her new life widened. Not through rescue, not through romance, through recognition. Nathaniel did not treat her like a woman recovering from Daniel. He treated her like a professional Daniel had been foolish enough to overlook. In the years that followed, Rachel's brick-wall office became a suite with soft morning light and walnut shelves. Her files became confidential. Her clients became powerful. Her calm became sharper than Daniel's applause had ever been. Sitting now near the service doors at his wedding, watching the ceremony close around another beautiful lie, Rachel understood that the life Daniel called ordinary had been the one place where truth had still known her name. 3 months before Daniel's wedding, the file with Evelyn Marks arrived on Rachel's desk at Reed Capital in a sealed digital review marked Priority Confidential. It looked ordinary at first, which was usually how the most dangerous falsehoods survived. There were business registrations, consulting agreements, charity invitations, archived photographs, and a timeline that moved through Boston, Palm Beach, Los Angeles, and back to New York with the smoothness of someone who knew when to leave before questions became official. Evelyn Marks had called herself many things: image advisor, social strategy consultant, personal brand specialist, founder liaison. Every title sounded harmless. Every city gave her a new circle of wealthy people to impress. Rachel read the file slowly in her sunlit office, the afternoon moving across the walnut shelves while traffic softened far below on 6th Avenue. Evelyn did not simply lie about herself. She studied women who had already earned trust and borrowed the details that made them believable. A favorite charity here, a color palette there, a speaking rhythm, a childhood memory reshaped until it felt intimate but impossible to verify. One woman reported that Evelyn had appeared at a fundraiser wearing the same pearl earrings and repeating the same donor language she had shared in a private consultation. Another said Evelyn used her personal story almost word for word during an investor dinner. A third described the feeling with painful simplicity. It was like watching someone walk into a room wearing my reflection. Rachel paused there, her finger resting beside the sentence. She understood that kind of theft. Not the loud kind that left papers missing from a drawer, but the quiet kind that turned a woman's labor into another person's elegance. Then she reached the appendix, and the room seemed to lose sound. Inside were old branding notes connected to Daniel's early company years. The documents were familiar before she even opened them. Executive warmth, quiet authority, trust before ambition. Humanize the room before asking for capital. Rachel had written those lines in the early days, when Daniel still practiced speeches in apartment mirrors and believed confidence was something she could hand him like a clean shirt. There were event images too. Rachel in a navy dress at Daniel's first Boston investor dinner. Rachel in pearls beside him at a charity luncheon. Rachel smiling with careful restraint at a company launch where everyone praised Daniel's instinct for presentation. None of those moments had belonged to Evelyn, and yet parts of them had been collected, archived, studied, and reused. Nathaniel Reed came into her office that evening with 2 paper cups of coffee and found her staring at the screen. He set one cup beside her hand and read in silence. He did not rush her. He did not cover the discovery with sympathy. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and precise. This connects to Brooks Meridian. Rachel nodded once. Daniel's company had been seeking a major financing package through a partner fund tied to Reed Capital, and Vanessa Clark had recently appeared in public materials as his strategic partner, his future wife, his proof of emotional and professional stability. Rachel opened a recent photograph attached to the review. Vanessa stood beside Daniel at a private reception, honey blonde hair pinned low, pearl earrings soft against her jaw, muted rose lipstick, one hand resting lightly on his arm. Beneath the polished image, Rachel saw Evelyn. Not clearly enough for a careless person. Clearly enough for someone trained by years of being overlooked. She changed the name, Rachel said. Nathaniel looked from the photograph to the older image of Evelyn Marks, then back again. But not the method. Over the following weeks, the legal team traced aliases, filings, contracts, image rights, and disputed brand assets. Rachel did not call Daniel. She did not warn him. Pride had sent her the invitation. Pride could receive the answer in public. Now, inside the Ellery Grand Ballroom, with the ceremony over and guests drifting toward dinner tables, Rachel watched Vanessa smile beside Daniel beneath chandeliers and white orchids. The bride looked perfect to everyone who did not know where to look. But Rachel knew. The pearl earrings, the controlled smile, the borrowed softness. the face that had been adjusted just enough to pass as new. At 7:42, Rachel's phone lit against the white tablecloth. Nathaniel's message appeared in one clean line. Everything is confirmed. Arriving now. Rachel turned the phone face down on the white tablecloth and lifted her water glass with the same calm she had carried through the ceremony. Around her, the ballroom loosened into reception noise. Chairs shifted, silverware chimed softly, and waiters moved between tables with plates of herb chicken, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls wrapped in linen. Daniel sat at the sweetheart table beside Vanessa, laughing with a venture partner, his hand resting over hers in a gesture carefully placed for witnesses. Every few minutes, his eyes traveled back to Rachel near the service doors, checking for the wound he had designed the evening to leave. He wanted her to see the flowers, the glass walls, the champagne, the white satin, the applause. He wanted the old wife to look at the new one and understand herself as an expired version of a life he had improved. Rachel watched him without giving him the satisfaction of visible pain. Then the ballroom entrance opened, and Nathaniel Reed stepped inside without announcement. He wore a charcoal tuxedo, a white dress shirt, and a dark blue pocket square, understated enough to seem effortless and expensive enough to quiet the people who knew what real influence looked like. He did not hurry. He nodded once to a senior partner near the aisle, crossed the room with measured steps, and stopped beside table 19. The guests closest to Rachel fell into a smaller silence. They knew his face from private investment dinners, financial panels, and the kind of rooms where one phone call could change a company's future. Nathaniel took the empty chair beside Rachel and placed a cream envelope near her plate. "Everything is confirmed," he said quietly. Rachel did not open it. She looked across the ballroom instead. Daniel had seen him. For 1 second, the polish left Daniel's expression and something rawer appeared beneath it. Recognition. Calculation. Then unease, hidden too late. Vanessa saw it too. Her hand tightened around the stem of her champagne flute, and her eyes dropped briefly to the envelope beside Rachel's plate. The band softened into a slow jazz melody as the wedding coordinator approached Daniel with a microphone. Daniel stood, perhaps a little faster than he intended, then adjusted his cufflinks and smiled until the room smiled back out of habit. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm through the hidden speakers. "This is not just a celebration of love. It is a celebration of becoming the person you were always meant to be." Guests nodded. Glasses lifted. Daniel turned toward Vanessa with practiced tenderness. "Vanessa came into my life when I finally understood that the future requires courage. It requires leaving behind what limits you and choosing what elevates you." A few eyes moved toward Rachel before quickly moving away. Daniel noticed. He liked it. He let the pause grow long enough to become cruel without becoming obvious. Rachel sat still, her hands folded beside the unopened envelope. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. Daniel continued, growing more confident with every quiet second the room gave him. "Some chapters teach us patience. Some teach us what we cannot carry forward. And then, if we are fortunate, someone extraordinary walks in and reminds us what it feels like to be matched, not managed." A thin ripple of polite laughter passed through the front tables. Rachel heard it, distant and harmless. Vanessa smiled, but the corners of her mouth had begun to strain. Daniel raised his glass higher, standing beneath the chandeliers as if light itself had agreed with him. "To my wife," he said. "To honesty, ambition, beauty, and a life built without looking back." Nathaniel picked up the cream envelope and opened it with one smooth motion. At the audio table near the wall, a hotel staff member checked a tablet and leaned toward the technician. The wedding slideshow behind Daniel flickered once, still showing a soft focus photograph of him and Vanessa near the Hudson River. Daniel lowered his glass slightly, annoyed by the interruption, but still smiling. Then the screen went black. The jazz melody faded. 3 silent seconds passed, long enough for every guest to look up. The screen came back with a white background so plain it seemed almost cold against the flowers, candles, and champagne. No music softened it. No romantic photograph appeared. At the top, in dark blue letters, were the words "Read Capital Verification Review." Beneath them was a single line, "Identity and Brand Integrity Findings." For a moment, the ballroom did not react because the image was too clean to feel dramatic. Then the next slide appeared, and the silence changed shape. On the left was Vanessa Clark in her engagement portrait with Daniel, honey blonde hair swept low, pearl earrings shining softly, her smile elegant beside the Hudson River. On the right was an older photograph of a woman with darker hair, sharper makeup, and the same uneven lift at the corner of her mouth. The name beneath the photograph read Evelyn Marks. Vanessa stood so abruptly that the legs of her chair pressed against the carpet with a dull sound. Daniel turned toward her, then back to the screen, his champagne glass lowering inch by inch. "Turn it off," he said, but without the microphone his voice sounded smaller than his pride. No one at the audio table moved quickly enough. The slides continued with business registrations from Boston, consulting materials from Palm Beach, and archived event images from Los Angeles. Each page was quiet, orderly, impossible to dismiss as gossip. Different names, different cities, the same method. Rachel remained seated at table 19, her hands folded beside the unopened program card. She did not smile. She did not need to. Truth, once placed in the right light, required no applause. The next slide brought the room closer to understanding. It showed Rachel years earlier at Daniel's first investor dinner, wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings, standing 2 steps behind him while he accepted congratulations. Beside it was Vanessa at a recent private reception, same pearls, same muted rose lipstick, same restrained smile, same carefully lowered chin. Another image appeared, Rachel at a charity luncheon in a cream coat, then Vanessa at a fundraising event in a nearly identical palette. Then came the language. Lines from Rachel's old brand notes appeared beside Vanessa's recent investor biography. Quiet authority, executive warmth, trust before ambition, humanize the room before asking for capital. Rachel remembered writing those words in their first Brooklyn apartment while Daniel practiced his handshake in the hallway mirror. She remembered printing them, refining them, giving him language that made powerful people feel safe around his ambition. Now those words glowed on a wedding screen, stripped of their origin, returned at last to the room where Daniel had meant to bury her. Nathaniel rose slowly, the cream envelope open in one hand. His voice did not need volume to carry. "Reed Capital has suspended all pending financing connected to Brooks Meridian," he said. The review found material concerns involving misrepresented identity materials, disputed brand assets, and collateral connected to unresolved marital filings. Daniel stared at him as if calm could be negotiated. "This is private," he said. Nathaniel looked at him without expression. "So was the work you used." A murmur moved through the ballroom, soft at first, then spreading from table to table. Investors lowered their glasses. A woman near the front looked at Vanessa's pearls, then at Rachel's, and understood the story without another word. Vanessa turned toward Daniel, her bridal softness thinning into something sharp and practical. "You told me everything was clean," she said. Daniel looked at her with disbelief that arrived too late to protect him. "You told me you were Vanessa Clark." Her laugh was quiet and empty. "And you told them you built yourself." The sentence traveled farther than either of them intended. Daniel's face changed then, not with regret, but with the sudden awareness that the room no longer belonged to him. He turned toward Rachel, seated exactly where he had placed her, near the service doors, beneath the careful weight of his insult. For the first time all evening, he did not look proud. He looked as if he had finally seen the shape of his own mistake. He had not married the woman of his dreams. He had married a reflection of the woman he threw away, polished by someone who understood his vanity better than he had ever understood love. Daniel stood beneath the glowing verification screen with the microphone still in his hand, but the room no longer belonged to his voice. The ballroom had become too quiet for performance. The band had stopped playing. Waiters stood along the walls with trays held carefully at their sides. The white orchids, the candles, the champagne, the glass walls overlooking Midtown. Every detail Daniel had purchased to make the evening feel untouchable now reflected the collapse of the story he had built. Vanessa looked from the screen to Daniel, then to the guests who had admired her only minutes earlier. Her diamond ring flashed as she touched it, not with affection, but with the practical coldness of someone deciding what could still be saved. "You said this was secure," she whispered, but the front tables heard enough. Daniel turned toward her, desperate to move the stain away from himself. "You lied about who you were." Vanessa's smile returned for one brief second, thin and empty. "And you lied about what you owned." The sentence moved through the room faster than applause. Investors lowered their glasses. A senior partner near the aisle stood without finishing his drink. One of Daniel's board members folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and walked toward the exit with the quiet care of a man protecting his own name. Others followed in small, polished movements. That was how reputation left a room, not with shouting, but with coats collected, eyes averted, and conversations postponed forever. Daniel watched them go, and for the first time Rachel saw him understand that the people he wanted to impress had never loved him. They had only believed him useful while the story looked clean. Then he turned to her. She was still seated at table 19, the place he had chosen for her humiliation, near the service doors, beneath the chandeliers that had failed to make him larger. "Rachel," he said, and her name sounded strange from his mouth, softer now, stripped of the authority he used to wrap around it. Rachel rose slowly. Her chair moved against the carpet with a quiet sound. Nathaniel stood beside her, but he did not touch her arm or step in front of her. He understood what Daniel had never learned. Dignity does not need a handler. Rachel picked up her black clutch, smoothed one hand over her dress, and looked once at the screen where her old photograph still rested beside Vanessa's borrowed image. She saw the pearls, the navy dress, the careful smile, the years when she had made herself smaller so Daniel could stand taller. None of it hurt the way it once might have. It had become history, and history no longer had permission to sit inside her chest. Daniel took one step closer. "I did not know," he said. The words were too late to be an apology and too small to be truth. Rachel looked at him without anger. Anger would have given him something to answer, something to argue with, something to survive. Her calm gave him nothing. "You did not replace me," she said quietly. "You only revealed how little you understood me." No one clapped. No one gasped. The sentence did not need decoration. Behind Daniel, Vanessa removed the ring and placed it on the white tablecloth as gently as if she were returning an item that had never belonged to her. Then she walked away through the side entrance, her satin gown whispering across the carpet. No longer the perfect bride, no longer the dream. Only a woman leaving a room where the mirror had finally cracked. Daniel did not follow her. He stood among white flowers and half-empty glasses, surrounded by the expensive shape of his own mistake. Rachel turned toward the ballroom doors. The young hostess who had given her the table 19 card stepped aside, eyes wide, and offered a small nod that felt more honest than any greeting Rachel had received that evening. Outside the ballroom, the hallway was quiet and gold. The doors closed behind her, softening the whispers into a distant hum. In the lobby below, December snow drifted past the tall windows, silver under the Manhattan streetlights. Nathaniel handed Rachel her coat without a word. She slipped into it, buttoned it slowly, and breathed in air that did not smell like roses, champagne, or Daniel's need to be admired. Through the glass behind her, Daniel looked smaller beneath the chandeliers, framed by flowers bought for a future that had already ended. Rachel did not turn back. Her heels touched the sidewalk with a steady rhythm, each step carrying her farther from the woman who once waited to be chosen. She had not won because he lost everything. She had won because losing her no longer gave him power over her life. She walked into the winter night with her name, her work, and her peace intact,